ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಿಗೆ ಬಂದಿರುವ ಜನ ಲೋಕಪಾಲ ಮಸೂದೆಯ ಚೈತನ್ಯ ಶಕ್ತಿ ಅಣ್ಣಾ ಹಜಾರೆ ಅವರೊಂದಿಗಿನ ನೇರ ಸಂವಾದದ ನೇರ ಪ್ರಸಾರ ಈಗ ಮುಂದುವರಿಯುತ್ತೆ.
He has not voluntarily given the bribe. He should not be made accused person.
Thank you very much, sir. There's a question from Mr. Prashant, the journalist, and if you're here, please identify yourself. Oh yes. A few of your questions have already been answered by Arvind, so I'll just raise the ones which I believe are not answered. How will the Jan Lokpal bill catch corporates? Action against politician is possible, but about corporates, action seems to be lacking. And second, does a movement of this nature threaten the representative democracy of India? I'll probably direct this question. The question is raised to Anna Hazare ji, so I'll request Anna Hazare ji to answer. From an overall perspective, from a common citizen's perspective, there is much said and much debated about how we can bring the politician to book, how we can bring the bureaucrat to book. But the highest levels of corruption seem to be happening at least, or seem to be rooted from corporates. And consequently, it is the corporates who seem to actually be fueling this corruption. And the 2G matter is an example. When I come to Mr. Prashant Bhushan, I'll raise that question. How do you think the Jan Lokpal, how do you think the Jan Lokpal movement can actually bring some sort of a control over corporates? And maybe Arvind, I'll request you to translate this question in Hindi to Anna Hazare ji and request an answer from him.
Right. I would suggest that the technical part of this can be answered by all of us, but the representative democracy that you said.
Perfect.
Yeah. You see, as far as the corporates is concerned, what we have suggested in the bill is, in any case of corruption, there are two parties. There is a giver and there is a taker. And in most of the cases, it is the government officer or the politician who is taker, and a private person who will be a giver. And that private person could be a corporate also. So what we have suggested, a few things. One is that if any business entity or any person or any corporate house obtains any benefit from the government which is against the law, then it is very difficult to prove that he has obtained it by giving a bribe. So it will be deemed to have been done through a corrupt mean, and the investigative agency will not need to prove that money was given and money was taken. So there is a deeming provision that we are suggesting, that if any person obtains a benefit from the government which is illegal, then he or she or that corporate entity would be deemed to have obtained through corrupt means. The second is that if any corporate, and if in a case of corruption there is a business entity involved, then 5 times the loss caused to the exchequer should be recovered from that entity. Then we are suggesting that if there is any business entity or corporate entity involved and they get convicted, the corruption is proved, then that business entity for all times to come should be barred from getting any government contracts. Then we are suggesting that all the MOUs and agreements, etc., which they obtain from the government should be put up on the website in the interest of transparency. Whether it is mining contracts, whether it is contracts for obtaining land, etc., etc., any big projects, small projects, they should be put up on the website. I would request Prashant if there is anything that I've left out, or Justice Santosh Hegde if I've left out.
No, the basic thing to remember is that, as Arvind said, that in every bribe or in every corrupt transaction, there is the public servant who receives that bribe, and there are others who give that bribe or who corrupt them. So as abettors, even under the present Prevention of Corruption Act, those who have given the bribe or those who have abetted that corruption, whether they are corporate entities or otherwise, they are in any case liable to be prosecuted in the same transaction. And as Arvind has pointed out, this bill has a unique provision which doesn't exist in the law presently, that at the time of conviction, at the time when the court convicts some people for bribery, for having taken or given bribes, at that time the court must make an assessment of the loss caused to the public exchequer or the loss caused to the government by that corrupt transaction, and that they must apportion that loss among all these people. And as Arvind has pointed out, the loss to be recovered from these corporate entities would be actually 5 times the loss. So therefore there are considerable provisions. Of course, these are all subject to be discussed and debated within the joint drafting committee, but it is not as if there are no provisions in this bill for prosecuting corrupt corporates.
I'll probably add a question to Mr. Prashant Bhushan and then probably go on to Mr. Hazare, because you brought up this aspect of corporate corruption. A brief background. Mr. Prashant Bhushan is actually the person who's championing the litigation in the 2G matter, where it's not just the politicians who are being brought to book. I think we've seen some of the best politicians, so-called best politicians of this country, cool their heels in Tihar. And people who we thought otherwise would always get bail have not gotten bail. So there is something which has changed in the system. But I benefit of being a lawyer, being a part of that litigation. I consider myself very fortunate actually to, in another matter which is connected with his, we really have got to do nothing because he has done most of the fighting in that litigation. The point is that you have, as a lawyer, seen that, for example, taking the 2G litigation as an example, that the epitome of corruption has been the corporate entity. Hundreds and thousands of crores have moved in such swift succession over. In 3 hours, there are 2,000 crores worth of demand draft being generated in 2.5 hours. Unthinkable. Whilst the politicians are actually facing the music, do you think that a Jan Lokpal legislation or this movement actually can effectively bring about a system where a private entity or corporate entity can actually be made accountable and will actually have the deterrence of trying to do something like what they have attempted to do in the 2G matter?
ಭ್ರಷ್ಟಾಚಾರ ಸಾಕು, ಜನ ಲೋಕಪಾಲ ಬೇಕು. ಸಾರ್ವಜನಿಕರೊಂದಿಗೆ ಅಣ್ಣಾ ಹಜಾರೆ ಅವರ ನೇರ ಸಂವಾದ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದ ನೇರ ಪ್ರಸಾರ ಮುಂದುವರಿಯುತ್ತೆ. ಒಂದು ಸಣ್ಣ ಬ್ರೇಕ್ ನಂತರ.